Hi guys, this is Erica from Gokce Capital.
Now before I begin, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications. Let me begin this video with two mysteries, one involving a great king, the other a middle-class Texan. Now many of us are familiar with the great engineering feat that is the ancient Roman aqueduct system, but you are probably not as familiar with the equally impressive architecture of the step wells of northern India, the deepest and largest of which is Chand Baori. At 13 stories deep, the step well is an Escher-like structure composed of thousands of steps leading down to a deep and cool deposit of water. Equal parts public works and pleasure palace for the king. One side of the step well contains a mini palace where the king could visit to take advantage of the cool temperature within the well. So impressive, even by the standards of step wells, was the Chand Baori, that legend has it was created not by man, but by a mischievous supernatural entity who breathed it into life in a single night and who still resides in its depths, playing tricks on visitors, primarily by disorienting visitors and ensuring that no one is able to use the exact same path on the way up that they took on the way down to the water. Now, in this day and age, technology has made it far easier to access water even in some of the most inhospitable locations. But even still, nature can play games with us. Which leads me to the second mystery of this video, and that is the case of the muddy pond. How a middle-class Texan bought a few acres of land and built a small fishing pond on his property. Because Texas is largely an arid state, he collected water for his pond from a well that he dug on site. The well delivered clear, cool water into the pond. Now, the pond would serve as a recreational resource, but he also would occasionally pump water out of it to irrigate his garden. Even though the well water supplied crystal clear water to the pond itself was constantly muddy, and so was the water that he pumped out of the pond into his garden. A mystery that he could not explain, and one which I'll illuminate at the end of this video. But suffice it to say, if you are thinking of drilling a well by hand, here are the top 6 things you should know. Number 1, it's very important to do your research first. You do not want to end up with muddy, contaminated, or unreliable water. So what are the things you should think about prior to starting your well project? Well, number 1, you want to be very clear what you are planning to use the well water for. Generally speaking, do-it-yourself well projects are best for irrigation or other non-consumptive purposes. And this is because, as our opening story showed, water quality can be very tricky, and you do not want to take any risks with you or your family's health. After you've determined the projected uses of your well, one of the most important things to research is the nature of the soil. Many water quality issues result from the surrounding soil. It's a good idea to have a soil test done on the area around where you are going to drill, but you can also contact your local ag extension office to see if they have soil profiles of the surrounding area. If you do get a soil sample analyzed, it's also a good idea to show this sample to a water quality specialist or engineer so you can understand any potential concerns you may need to consider. The next most important factor is the depth to the groundwater, and this can make or break a do-it-yourself project. The closer the water is to the surface, the easier it is for you to drill a well yourself. But alternatively, water close to the surface is also more likely to be unreliable. Shallow wells are more likely to have seasonal fluctuations in the quantity of water that they are able to provide, and may even have seasonal dry spells. Though it's third on the list, it is also very important to check whether the area in which you're going to drill your well is a wet or marshy area. A wet or marshy area is more or less a no-go for a well. And then, as I just alluded to, you'll want to check whether there is seasonal variation in the water table on your property. If this is the case, you'll want to drill your well past the point at which you first reach water so that you get to the depth at which you will have a reliable, steady water source. And finally, you'll want to understand what kinds of infrastructure are already buried in your property. Any sort of underground utilities will need to be avoided, but in particular, you'll want to make note of any septic tanks or leach fields on your property or your neighbor's properties, because generally you'll need to have the well set back by at least 100 feet. After you've done your research, you'll want to give the local environmental health department a call, or the relevant department that issues well permits. Some areas may not allow you to drill a well by hand at all. There are many jurisdictions that require a licensed excavator to drill any sort of well. But sometimes, depending on the use, you may be able to drill a well yourself, although you will still need to apply for a permit. So you'll want to understand the regulations as well as the permit process if this is required. Now, once you get a go-ahead from the local jurisdiction, you can purchase a do-it-yourself well drilling kit. These kits include most of the tools and materials that you will need to drill a well, except for the PVC piping that you will use to form the permanent well tube. Now, I'll note that these kits are for shallow wells. If you have to drill a deeper well by hand, you are going to need to get special equipment, like a pneumatic drill, in order to complete the project. You will also need to purchase a permanent well pump on top of PVC piping. Now, as you are undertaking your project, it is very important that you protect your well from contaminants. And one of the primary ways to protect your well water is to map out all potential contaminants on or near your property and ensure that the well is away from these sources of contamination. Such contaminants can include buried fuel tanks, septic tanks and leach fields, as we mentioned earlier, any waste disposal sites, and animal feedlots. Also, make sure you're complying with any regulated setbacks imposed by zoning or building codes. There are almost always going to be setback requirements from septic tanks and leach fields, but there will also be setbacks required from any roads or buildings. Now, legally, you'll have to comply with these, but even if you are thinking about trying and skirting around such requirements, it's important that you don't do so because these setbacks are created to protect public health. Now, when you're constructing your well, you also want to avoid contaminating it with your own soil. So make sure that you use best practices as you're excavating and disposing of your soil. And finally, once you have constructed the well, make sure that you disinfect the water and test it. And this is perhaps one of the most important pointers here. Before you use any water from a well, it should be tested for heavy metals, bacteria, chemicals, and other contaminants. In addition, you'll want to continue to test this water at a minimum of once a year. And finally, understand the well digging process. If you're digging a shallow well, you can use a hand auger, but for a deeper well, you are going to need specialty equipment, as I mentioned earlier. You then use a PVC pipe as the well shaft. Drill holes in the PVC pipe and put a cap at the bottom to reduce sediment. You'll also want to add a foot valve so that water can come up but not go back down the well. You'll place the PVC pipe in the hole and use gravel to fill in some of the holes, then pack dirt in around the pipe. Be very careful to fill the soil back in the same order you took it out. You'll then connect the pipe to the pump using an adapter and finish the well with a base. Now, if this sounds like an easy process, remember that, well, it can be relatively easy to construct the well yourself. Ensuring that you are getting quality water is much more difficult. And this is why it is generally a good idea to hire a professional to construct the well for you. At the very least, you may want to discuss your options with a local well drilling consultant and ensure that you adequately test the water to ensure that it is free of contaminants. Water has a way of confounding us all, and you cannot rely on appearance alone. So what was making our Texans pond so muddy? Well, the well water contained high levels of carbonates and bicarbonates, and these compounds prevented suspended clay particles in the pond water from settling, creating high turbidity. The pond owner did eventually reach out to a consultant who advised him to add gypsum to the pond water, which he did, and this solved the issue, but unfortunately he was also advised not to use the pond for irrigation, which he also ceased to do. Now, do you have any other stories about drilling a well? Let us know in the comments. Did you like this video? You're going to love our Gokce Land Due Diligence program. We'll make you a land due diligence expert in just 7 days. Check it out at gokcecapital.com/glad. And while you're at our website, don't forget to explore our $1 down properties at gokcecapital.com/listings. Finally, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. You can email, call, or text, and we will respond as soon as possible. So thank you for listening, and more to come.